Joining us now is Reza Aslan. He is a religion scholar, journalist, and author of the very important new book, Zealot. Reza, how you doing? Thanks for joining us.
Oh, it's great. It's great to be here.
So, Reza, I right off the bat got to get to this book, but I think most of us have probably seen this interview that happened on Fox, and I just feel like we need to get this out of the way. Are you a Muslim?
I am what you would call a secret Muslim.
I think we heard
Look,
about this.
I understand, all the kind of craziness about this, and I get it. I understand why there are people who are nervous or afraid about the book. But the truth of the matter is that anybody who's read the book can tell you that there's really nothing in there that's an attack on Christianity, and nothing could be further from the truth. I mean, the book deals with Jesus as a historical figure in, I think, what can only be described as, not just sympathetic, but in a devotional way, really.
Yeah, so I'm just going to say parenthetically that people like Frank Gaffney would warn us and say, look at how savvy these secret Muslim agents are. But I'm not going to indulge myself. Well, I did by making that joke. But let's get to the book. So this book is fascinating, and what you're doing really is you're taking not a religious view of the book from any perspective, but you're really trying to work textually and historically and present who this guy actually was. And I think an interesting way that you frame the book is your own story of your relationship with Jesus, which actually surprised me. It began with a conversion experience when you were a teenager. So could you talk about the kind of evolution of your relationship with Jesus?
Yeah, so, my family came to the United States from Iran in 1979. We were, essentially Muslim in the way that a lot of Iranians are just kind of ethnically or culturally Muslim. We didn't really have that much of a religious life back in Iran, but certainly in the United States, we kind of scrubbed our lives of any kind of hint of Islam at a time in which anti-Muslim sentiment was, pretty high with the whole Iran hostage crisis and everything.
Right.
So I didn't really grow up with much religious instruction, though I was, deeply hungry for kind of a sense of spiritualism. And I, in high school, found that spiritualism when I went to an evangelical youth camp and heard the gospel for the first time. This remarkable story about God coming down in the form of a man and dying for the sins of humanity. I completely absorbed that message, converted to evangelical Christianity, spent the next few years, preaching that gospel message to pretty much everyone that I encountered. In college, I went to a Jesuit Catholic university and decided to begin studying the New Testament formally. And it was then that I sort of noticed a distance between the Christ that I had been introduced to in church and this historical person, Jesus of Nazareth, who walked the earth 2,000 years ago in a land that the Romans would call Palestine. And so for me, in this weird way, even though I began to kind of move away from the Christian church, and by no means am I a Christian any longer. In fact, with the encouragement of my Jesuit priests at Santa Clara University, went back to the faith of my forefathers, Islam.
Wow.
But at the same time, I became far more interested in Jesus of Nazareth, this person, than I ever was of Jesus the Christ. And that was kind of the impetus for this book, which, 20 years later is now finally out.
That's fascinating. So what does zealot mean in this context? Because it seems to me that, you've obviously chosen that word for a reason, and that gets to the heart of what your historical claim about Jesus is, that he was in a very specific, really political context and had a kind of nationalist liberation message.
Well, Zealotism was a widespread biblical doctrine in first century Palestine. I mean, for the majority of Jews who revered the great heroes and prophets and kings of the Hebrew Bible, these men were all referred to as being zealous for the Lord. What zeal implies was an uncompromising devotion to the Torah, the law of Moses, a refusal to serve any master except the master of the universe, and a commitment to the sole sovereignty of God. In other words, the Hebrew Bible commands the Jews to cleanse the Holy Land of all foreign presence and to dedicate it solely to the chosen people. And it was the zealous warriors of God who defeated the Canaanites and the Amalekites and the Jebusites and all those other tribes to create the land of Israel to begin with. So Zealotism in the first century became a very important ideology because, of course, this is a time in which the Romans were living under the boot of a pagan imperial power. They were under direct Roman occupation. And this concept of zeal was used by a number of revolutionaries, messiahs, preachers, prophets, bandits to rally the Jews to fight back against Rome, to cleanse the Holy Land, to remove the yoke of occupation from the Jews. And by the way, in 66 CE, this actually finally worked. The Jews rose up in revolt and managed to kick the Romans out of Jerusalem and keep them at bay for about 3 or 4 years before they returned and pretty much slaughtered everyone and burned the city to the ground. Right. The argument of the book is that sentiment, that idea of zeal for the Lord and the desire to rid the land of the Roman occupation is deeply a part of Jesus' teachings and actions. It's a framework for understanding not just who he was, but what he was trying to do.
And connected with that, that Jesus was this political figure, essentially. That's what you're saying. And that in terms of how we identify Jesus in a modern context, that it's very appropriate to see him on the side, very unequivocally, not just even like in a charitable, he cared about the poor, the downtrodden, because he was so compassionate sense. But that, no, this was literally the ideology that he was a part of enacting and creating in that time, and that was his message fundamentally.
Well, to be clear, in Jesus' time, there was no difference between religion and politics. They were one and the same. The kind of simple divisions that we understand today did not exist for Jesus. So simply saying the phrase, "I am the Messiah," was not just a religious statement. It was also a profoundly political statement. Messiah means the anointed one. The principal task of the Messiah is to recreate the kingdom of David. So if you're claiming to be the one sent by God to usher in God's kingdom on earth, then what you're also saying is that you're here to usher out the kingdom of Caesar. They would have seen those statements as one and the same. So it's not so much an argument that Jesus was, quote, a political figure, not a religious one. It's a reminder to modern readers that the context in which Jesus lived, his actions, his words, his teachings, were such that everything he said would have been profoundly political.
That's fat. And then just the kind of another, I think, important piece of this is the image that we have of Jesus that is more in the popular imagination and traditional theology. Is that a product of St. Paul or Roman figures in Christianity almost like rebranding this figure in a way that would be more appealing for a kind of Rome-based cosmopolitan religion? Is that where the kind of makeover happens?
Well, I think that's a great way of putting it. I mean, we have to remember that the followers of Jesus, the men and women who walked with him and talked with him, who ate with him, who shared his bread, who were there when he began his movement, who were there when he was arrested and crucified, were, like Jesus, mostly illiterate, uneducated peasants, farmers, fishermen, day laborers. And so, as a result, these were people who would not have the ability to either read or write about Jesus and their experiences, or, for that matter, to even, espouse complex theological doctrines about him and what he meant and what his, ideology stood for. That task actually fell to a second and third generation of Christians who, unlike Jesus' Aramaic-speaking peasant followers, were mostly Greek-speaking Jews who did not live in the Holy Land, but instead lived in the diaspora, in these deeply Hellenized, Romanized, cosmopolitan urban cities like Antioch and Alexandria, Rome and Philippi and Corinth, etc. These were Jews who were steeped in Greek and Roman traditions and culture, and when they began to write about Jesus, to talk about Jesus, to spread the message of Jesus, they did so with a deeply Hellenistic influence. And, more importantly, they did so increasingly addressed to a non-Jewish audience, to a Gentile audience instead, to a Roman audience. And frankly, this Roman audience was much more familiar with the kind of Jesus that they were talking about, this sort of Romanized demigod, this detached celestial spirit with no concerns about the cares of this world, than the Jews who lived with him and talked with him recognized themselves. And so you're right. What we kind of know about Jesus, what we know about Christianity was sort of launched by people who didn't actually know Jesus while he was alive.
That's fascinating. I think, Matt, go ahead, jump in.
So this past Friday was, I believe, you were on Fox News. And, I mean, when they contacted you, I'm sure you had a feeling what they were going to get at here. Am I right?
Well, yes. I mean, I'm familiar with Fox News for sure. And they did a few days before the interview, they published an attack piece on me. So I kind of had an idea what I was getting into.
Yeah. I mean, it's amazing to me that they, like, I can't even count how many times they had to bring up that, and you're a Muslim. As if, I mean, you said it on the second page, you mentioned how you're a Muslim, as if it even matters to begin with. But I mean, it's not like you were even a secret Muslim, even though that's what we joke about. I mean, you were out in the book.
You're out in your entire professional profile.
I do mention in like the second page of the book that yes, that I am a Muslim.
Do they even realize that Jesus is a historical figure? And also, I mean, in Islam, Jesus is a prophet. It's not like it's not like you're even just discussing Christianity with this book by talking about Jesus.
Right. Well, so yeah, you brought up two very, very good points. Number one is that, yes, absolutely, Muslims believe that Jesus was a prophet. In fact, you know, most of the gospel story in a kind of Reader's Digest version of it can be found in the Quran. But on a larger point, I'm not writing this book from a Muslim perspective or from a Jewish or Christian perspective at all. I'm writing it from a scholarly perspective. I'm a scholar. It's what I do for a living. Mm-hmm. So, as I mentioned in that interview, there's a lot of things that I talk about Jesus that actually violate core Muslim ideas about Jesus. And I've had a lot of Muslims who were upset with the book and what I say about the historical Jesus. So, I think it's just factually incorrect that this book is some sort of Muslim account of Jesus. Uh-huh. There are some books out there about the Muslim Jesus, and this isn't one of them. And B, I think sort of the philosophical backbone of the question is that it would be impossible for someone to write about Jesus without some kind of faith-based prejudice. And I would say that, a lot of scholars who are Jewish, Christian, Muslim, Buddhist, and atheist who write about religious figures have been doing this for centuries. I mean, it's weird to all of a sudden talk about it as though only practitioners of a faith can write about the prophets of that faith. If that were true, then there would be a lot fewer Islam books out there.
Right, there would be almost none in America. But I think a final question that I want to get to you on this specifically, though, is it seems to me that this is the tip of a campaign to really not allow, in some respects, Muslims to function in civic space in America, whether it's building a progressive and pluralistic mosque on Ground Zero, or saying, hey, you're a religion scholar, but forget it. You have a certain, you're Muslim, you can't write this book. I think that's what's been so darkly hilarious, but also just shocking about how naked this outburst has been. And I would just add in as an addendum, everybody should go and buy this book through the Majority Report link on Amazon and buy Zealot, and also write a response to some of these just like obscene reviews that are on the site that are the foot soldiers of the Fox interview, so to speak.
Yeah, this is, I mean, look, I wish I could say that this is new. It's not new. I mean, I've been dealing with this pretty much my entire professional life. There are a very well-coordinated, very well-funded cabal of organizations and individuals, often referred to as the Islamophobia industry, that have made me a target of their fun. And you know, I deal with this all the time. I think the knives have come out perhaps a little bit more strongly because in this particular case, rather than talking about Muhammad or Islam, I'm talking about Jesus and Judaism, not necessarily Christianity, because as I have to constantly remind people, Jesus was not a Christian, Jesus was a Jew. This book is not about Christianity. The book is about Judaism, actually. And, you know, it's kind of expected. I mean, I'm not, you know, I'm not in any way surprised at the level of vitriol that I have received. And yeah, you're right, my Amazon page has been hijacked by really a handful of people with about 100 fake handles who are just cutting and pasting the same you know, vitriol over and over again. And you know, hopefully people will go on there and you can report abuse on those comments. And I mean, I would hope eventually that Amazon would recognize, you know, what is going on the page and will do something about it, but I don't really have any say in that.
Right. Well, Reza Aslan,
before you go, actually,
Yes,
I
sir.
just want to say thank you so much for providing that entertainment on that program. I mean, that might be one of the greatest.
Yeah, you handled that amazingly
really
well.
Might have been one of the greatest any sort of right-wing media smackdown I've ever seen. It's legendary.
And also, the right should thank you because you gave them the idea of a PhD in Reagan, which anybody who watches it will know what I'm saying. I'm sure that they appreciate it and spite themselves.
Happy to serve. Happy to serve.
Reza Aslan, thank you so much. Everybody should buy Zealot. It's a fascinating book. And as my grandmother, Jewish grandmother, would say, Jesus was a lovely man and he said nothing new. So, thank you so much,
you, guys.
Reza.
Great to talk to you.